Welcome to Arcana Orbis, the secrets of the world. Where did the assassination of Julius Caesar really happen? And if he did say anything, what would it have been? In this episode, we will look into the different accounts about what happened on the 15th of March, 44 BC, that fateful day of the death of Caesar. We shall go over the motivation, the conspiracy, the place, the assassination, and lastly, we shall look at the questionable truth behind the famous lines Et tu Brute and Sic semper tyrannis, and see if they stand up for scrutiny. We have learned that the events this particular day are quite clear, but if we lay the accounts from the main sources on top of each other, we can see that they differ on some issues and focuses on different persons and circumstances. So, we must realize that the accepted narrative of the assassination of Caesar is a convenient amalgamation of three ancient historians and at least two Renaissance dramatists. The accounts of the events on the Ides of March are Nicolaus of Damascus, who wrote about this just a few years after the murder, and Plutarchus or Plutarch, who wrote about the assassination around 75 AD, and Suetonius, who wrote about these events in 125 AD. And of course, for this event, the important play Julius Caesar from 1599 by William Shakespeare, the dramatist who arguably is the one who have made this day in history so famous and who added some of his own fantasy and also, as it seems, took some from contemporary sources, for example Richard Eads. Well, we shall dig deeper into this later on in this assessment. So, let us dive into the accepted version of the assassination of Gaius Julius Caesar. Since the differences between the ancient narratives are so many, it would need a separate episode. The Roman Senate consisted of the patrician elite, who had in effect ruled Rome since the foundation of the Republic in 509 BC. But before this, it had been functioning as a council and the legislative body in Rome during the centuries as a kingdom. If one tried to think of a motive for the assassination of Caesar, one must take into the account all the things that combined made it seem like killing him would be the only viable solution to preserve the old ways of the Republic, even for Caesar's most loyal friends in the Senate. For instance, Caesar was appointed dictator perpetuo, dictator for life, shortly before the assassination. In the Republic of Rome, the position of dictator was a very special appointment by the Senate, meant to protect the state from a crisis, like a threat from an invading army, for example. And the position of dictator was highly regulated. And perhaps most importantly, it was meant to last for a maximum of 6 months. Caesar also made reforms popular among the people, but not so much by the senators. For example, he regulated the calendar, changed the administration and electoral system, and he added hundreds of new people to the Senate, from 600 to 900, and this from his supporters amongst the people of Rome. He was acting more and more like a royalty in the eyes of the Senate, and the commoners even hailed him as a king, shouting Rex, Rex, Rex in the streets. The Senate started to suspect him of aspiring to be a king, which was anathema to the Roman ideal of the Republic. And thus, a conspiracy to get rid of him was born. From the 900 senators, 60 of them were on such close terms they could trust each other. They managed to have many meetings without anything reaching Julius Caesar's ears. They agreed that they would all stab him with their daggers, and they decided to make the assassination in the open, so the people could see that they did it in the name of the Republic and for the benefit of the people of Rome. During these meetings they couldn't agree on how and where they would strike, and since the regular Senate building at the Forum was being renovated at this time, the Senate meetings were held at different locations all around the city. Therefore, they had to hide their daggers in all possible locations. Caesar had begun a restoration and a restructuring of the old Senate building Curia Julia in Forum Romanum, which was ongoing during these years. Thus, he had to summon the Senate to a meeting in Curia Pompeia. This was a rather large building in the enormous private temple and theatre complex built by Pompeius Magnus, or Pompey the Great. The conspirators had to bring their daggers in their togas this day, since it was no time to hide them as they had planned. In a very brief and extremely condensed version, one can say that Caesar felt sick and he didn't want to go to the Senate meeting. His wife had dreamt of death and blood. Decimus had come to his house and tried to trick him to go to the Senate meeting by lying about a bill proposal to allow him to call himself king outside of Italy. Caesar hesitated, and Decimus had to persuade him further, and said that not everyone in the Senate was in favor of the proposal, so Caesar must come. Flattered, he went to the meeting. A commotion arose inside the Curia as the conspirators surrounded Caesar. Casca was first to stab at him from behind, but missed. Cassius then cut him in the face. Titidius thrusted his dagger in Caesar's chest. Now other senators tried to help but got hindered by the conspirators. Decimus now stepped forward and cut Caesar in the thigh. Cassius missed his thrust in the commotion and accidentally cut Brutus in his hand. Brutus, now bleeding, stabbed Caesar between his legs. Caesar either said nothing at this point or he uttered "kai sou teknon" in Greek, "even you, my child." After this, Caesar fell and pulled his toga over his face in disgrace and quickly bled to death. Now 18 of the 23 conspirators who cut the dictator came forward and stabbed the already dead man. The rest of the conspirators just looked on and then fled the building. In the play Julius Caesar from 1599 by William Shakespeare, "Et tu, Brute" is partly out of a dialogue phrase uttered by Henry VI in an earlier play by Shakespeare from 1598. The line is "Et tu, Brute, wilt thou stab Caesar too?" ending it with a question mark. Now, according to Wikipedia, some rumor has it that Richard Eads is the original author of this line. He wrote the Latin drama Caesar Interfectus in 1582, in which Julius Caesar asked this to his mistress, Servilla's son Brutus, the boy that became Caesar's protege and favorite in the Senate. This is written in a macaronic language, which was a quite common use of ironic, humoristic mixing of languages in Europe at this time when English drama was so popular. One can debate whether it means "even you, Brutus," or "and you too, Brutus," which has some differences to it. We find the play Julius Caesar in the original Shakespeare folio from 1623, but the play itself is believed to have been written in 1599. And in it is this world-famous line printed, "Et tu, Brute," with a question mark. After this, there is a long line suggesting a long pause, and then his last words are than for Caesar. Now this begs the question, is this also a use of the macaronic language, like in his play Henry VI? If so, what would be the meaning of irony or comic utterance from a dying Caesar? It is especially strange since Cinna says in the play, "Liberty, freedom, tyranny is dead, run hence, proclaim, cry it about the streets." It is hard to find this comical, but maybe William Shakespeare made an inside joke meant to amuse his friends, or maybe he made a disguised reference to a contemporary political situation. According to A.J. Woodman, this phrase can be interpreted as a warning. It would go something like, "You too, my son, will have a taste of power," foreboding Brutus's suicide only 2 years after he stabbed his patron Caesar. Horatius, or Horace, wrote a poem about Brutus in his Satires in around 30 BC, which is only 14 years after the assassination of Julius Caesar. The author, John Henderson, means that Horace's poem about Brutus' stabbing of Caesar and later his suicide could be interpreted as a complaint of a, quote, "suggestion of mimetic compulsion," end of quote. Here we can find some ground for an ironic or even a sarcastic comment by Shakespeare about the way it all ended for the defenders of the Republic, or at least the fate of Marcus Junius Brutus, Caesar's closest friend amongst the senators. Can Shakespeare have made a reference to the power struggles in the court, like the execution of Queen Mary of the Scots in 1587? So, what about the almost equally famous line, "Sic semper tyrannis," thus always to tyrants, supposedly exclaimed by Brutus immediately after the senators had stabbed their leader to death? It was used among the United States colored troops during the American Civil War, and it is the motto of the states of Virginia. The one famous usage of this phrase we know about was by the American actor John Wilkes Booth, who had been acting in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar in 1864, the year before he murdered the American president Abraham Lincoln in a theater in Washington, D.C. But what about Brutus? Did he shout this "Sic semper tyrannis"? Well, according to Plutarch, he didn't have a chance to be heard, since the Senate was in a panic and everybody was running for the doors. Suetonius comments that Caesar just let out a groan at the first cut, but he states that some have written that he said, "You too, my child," in Greek. Who these some were is not said. The one commentator who deviates most from the common narrative is Nicolaus of Damascus. He was the one who first wrote about the assassination, and this many decades before anyone else. He states that the Senator Minucius hits Senator Rubrius in the thigh when he tries to stab Caesar, but not a word about either Brutus stabbing him between his legs or Caesar saying anything. As we have seen, there are many accounts of which none are first-hand witness accounts. They are all second or even third hearsay relays of what happened. Why didn't Plutarch and Suetonius use the accounts of Nicolaus of Damascus more closely? He wrote down witness statements in Rome just a few years after the assassination. Was this just due to poetic license, or had they even read his accounts in the first place? Was it due to the politics of the day that formed the way they put it to the public? Any which way, the assassination of Caesar did form the future of the Western world, and it is still referred to in politics and culture. Depending the situation and who is talking, Caesar was either a benevolent leader or an evil tyrant. Brutus was either a patriot or a traitorous assassin. Were those who wrote about it really unbiased? Did they have an agenda?